This
Stephanie, thank you
conference
for
will
joining
now
us.
be recorded.
And the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of Administrator Brand in Rural Business Cooperative Service and Rural Development at USDA. We would like to thank IAC and Dan Cornelius for working with USDA, and we would also like to thank all of the guest speakers from the Red Cliff Band of Chippewa Indians and the Forest County Potawatomi Tribe. And we would also like to remind you that all of the applications for VAPG are still open until electronically until March the 5th. Our paper application due date is March the 10th. There's a lot of grant money being made available through this round of VAPG funding, and we look forward to working with you through the wonderful VAPG grant process. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Diane Cullo, were you able to join? Diane, are you there? I know she is there, so let me give her a moment to see if we can get her unmuted. Dan, I don't know if you can see if her phone is unmuted or not. Dan, were you able to patch through? Well, it does not look like her audio is working, so I apologize for that. I know she wanted to join. She's texting me as we speak, so I apologize for us not being able to make that happen. Diane is the director of our Office of Tribal Relations at USDA, and she also wanted to add a few words of welcome. So just know that she and OTR are there as a resource for you all moving forward. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan Cornelius so that he can say a few words about Intertribal Ag Council, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion for the rest of the day. Dan?
Thank you, Ted. I'm the technical assistant specialist for the Great Lakes region with the Intertribal Agriculture Council. And our technical assistance network works with USDA and with tribes to help to get better access to USDA programs. So everything from conservation to financing to marketing, product development, and value-added production that we're talking about today. I did want to briefly mention that one of our programs, our American Indian Foods program, has a no-cost trademark. Got a picture of the trademark on the slide here, made by American Indians. So that's a great resource. If you go to our website, indianag.org, you can find the information for the application process. Natasha Redhouse is our director for that program. You can also find more information on our technical assistance network and other efforts that we have in providing leadership in native agriculture, including the Native Farm Bill Coalition. Ted, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dan. So we had a couple tribal examples that we wanted to highlight as we got started before we jumped into the program specifics. Dan, can you see if our colleague from Red Cliff is on and able to join via audio? And if not, we'll have Mike do the examples from Wisconsin, tribes in Wisconsin on their behalf.
Chad, are you on the line?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
We sure can.
Oh, perfect.
Dan, could you introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about what you're working on with your tribe and through the Value-Added Producer Grant Assistance?
Yeah, I'll just I'll keep it brief, and if you guys have any questions, I can answer them. It was back in 2015 or 2016, we had applied to rural development for the Value-Added Producer Grant to do a feasibility study on building a fish processing facility on the Red Cliff Reservation. Red Cliff has a robust commercial fishery, but we have never been able to kind of maximize that catch. Almost all the catch has been historically sold off reservation to non-native wholesalers. And so through the VAPG, we applied to have this feasibility study completed. Our request, I had to look back at our budget, but our request to USDA was about $51,000. And of course, there's a one-to-one match requirement for the value-added producer grant, which came from some of my time involvement as in-kind. IAC was able to provide us a cash match. We had some leftover BIA economic development money that we were able to retool. And, that's important for any tribe to remember that BIA 638 funds can be used as a non-federal match. And then one of the consultants that helped write the plan also contributed in kind in the form of his time and hours involved in the drafting of it. And really, getting this value-added producer grant was the game changer for us because it was nearly complete when the Keep Seagull settlement funds, when they were advertising for organizations to submit for the Keep Seagull settlement funds, the first disbursement of those monies. And our feasibility study was far enough along that we were able to use that to express the kind of building we wanted to build, the general cost of the building, the cost of some of the equipment that would go in the building, and show profit margins and things like that as well. So from the VAPG, we were successful in getting some Keep Seagull funds, and since that time, we've also went back to rural development, and we're currently writing the formal business plan through a rural business development grant. And we are also successful in getting some A&A SEDS money. So from the Administration for Native Americans, the Social Economic Development Fund that they have. And between these different pots of money, we're in the midst of construction right now and buying a whole bunch of equipment for a facility, valued it'll be well valued over $1 million. And it's been really all started with the VAPG planning grant and being able to get that feasibility study completed.
Thank you, and we really appreciate you jumping on and sharing your perspective and story. I'm guessing there probably will be some questions for you, but I think you might have another commitment to get to, so stay on as long as you'd like, but we also might have to follow back if folks want to learn more about your specific project. So thank you for being so generous with your thoughts and your time. Mike Daniels, did you want to share a little bit about our work with Forest County Potawatomi tribe as well through the value-added program?
Certainly, I appreciate that. Dave Cronauer from Forest County expresses his regret that he wasn't able to be with us today. Forest County applied for and received value-added producer grant in 2018 for the processing costs associated with their pasture-raised bison, beef, pork, and poultry operation. It was a little over $153,000 grant over a 3-year period. The money is to be spent on processing and packaging of the meat, as well as transferring the meat from the butcher back to the farm. The first thing they considered was the scope of the project and how it would directly help the Forest County Potawatomi accomplish its goals. The goal was for the project to be based off a feasibility study done titled Building Healthy Communities Through Tribal Food Systems. The feasibility study was the foundation for building a farm that would serve as a tribal community and make good and healthy food available. We looked at options of how to best utilize the grant funds to accomplish this. Some projects were considered was protein production, vegetable production, aquaponics. They determined that the protein component would be the best choice. The application process was complex and time consuming, but well worth it. We started writing the grant in August and submitted it in January. The grant was almost 200 pages. We had a weekly meeting with our grant team. At those meetings, they would talk about particular topics and figure out what data or information was needed. They would complete their homework for the next week and then come back. The great part of the process was looking at the business and knowing your numbers. The process makes you dissect the business and determine that you're actually going to be successful. The numbers allow you to see where the money is being spent and determine if it is needed expense or not. It also puts projections in place that will keep you on track. The grant has been positive overall. We do have an exceptional grants team that has made writing much more easier. It has allowed us to process large quantities of meat at a time to increase efficiency. We now have the protein packaged in very nice vacuum sealed bags with our label on them. They are readily accessible to our target audience and has been working out very well. The negative aspects are pretty minor. The first obstacle is to find match funds for the grant. We decided to use in-kind of the value of the meat that we are producing. The downfall of this is the value of the meat was a projection based on the time the grant was written. The USDA value for meat changes daily, so it can cause some problems with matching funds. The next obstacle was to track where the meat was going and to quantify it to make sure our goals are being met. If you have any questions about their journey, or if Dave can be any of assistance, we have his contact information, and Dan, maybe we can get that posted where people can contact Dave at a later time. And for that, thank you very much from Forest County.
Thank you, Mike. So a couple things. One, we are recording today's webinar, so there should be a recording that folks can access after the fact. We did it a little bit topsy-turvy. We wanted to give you a couple examples of tribes that have used the program pretty recently and how they're utilizing the funding to realize their value-added goals, along with other funds, either from the tribe or other resources. So thanks for listening to those. We'll now turn to basically a step-by-step walkthrough of the Value-Added Producer Grant Program and the current funding opportunities. So our presenters are Mike Daniels again and Greg York. So I'll turn it over to you guys to walk us through the content.
Thanks a lot, Ted. As Ted said, my name is Mike Daniels. I'm working with our national office now as a grant specialist, program management analyst for the Value Add Producer Grant. Dan, I am not able to control the PowerPoint, so if I can get, there we go. So the purpose of the program is to provide funds for economic planning activities. This is an opportunity for ag entrepreneurs to be less reliant on conventional ag markets, which allows the producer to keep a larger slice of the pie for themselves. A little bit of lag here, sorry, I apologize for that. Just what Value Add Producer Grant is not, it's not a technical assistance program, it's not a job training program, and it's not a consistent stream of capital and it's not for equipment or real estate improvements. Value Added also is not an ag production program. We need to make sure that the ag producer is not, make sure you're not trying to change your venture to fit a grant program. Please don't try to fit a round peg into a square hole. Okay, sorry about that. So for this go around, we have over $60 million available for the Value Add Producer Grant. There's a 10% set aside for beginning farmers, veteran, or socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and also a 10% set aside for mid-tier value chain. There's also a 10% set aside of the budget amount for persistent poverty counters. Later in the presentation, a link to our website will give you the contact information for all the state offices for you to, so you can find the Rural Development State Office. The application deadlines, as Stephanie had indicated earlier, by paper are due the 10th of March, or by grants.gov by the 5th of March. As in the past, the grants are up to a $75,000 planning grant or a $250,000 working capital grant. Please be reminded, as was talked about by Chad and by discussion from Dave, it is a dollar for dollar match, but there's ways that we can work through to come up with those funds. Moving on to the next slide. Eligible, who is eligible? You must be an ag producer, an individual entity that produces an ag commodity through participation in the day-to-day labor, management, and field operations, and you must meet one of the 4 applicant eligibility types. Those types include independent producers, independent producers, an ag producer or entity that is solely owned and controlled by ag producers. And that independent producer may also be a harvester. So if you're harvesting trees where you have timber rights, or as in Red Cliff, they have their harvester of fish off of Lake Superior. So you can also be a harvester. A steering committee could also be eligible in that they would be a group of independent producers that want to form an organization to apply for a value add producer grant. Let's move on to a steering committee would be a group of independent producers who want to form an organization, apply for a value add producer grant. They have to produce the ag commodity. One of the independent producers would have to have the SAM and DUNS number. If they are awarded the funding, the committee would need to form a new entity prior to the execution of the financial services agreement. Moving on. The Farmer Rancher Co-op is another one of the 4 entity types. That's a business that's owned and controlled by ag producers, that is incorporated or otherwise identified by the state in which it operates. A majority of the members of the co-op do have to be ag producers. Moving on. Majority controlled producer-based business. A majority controlled producer-based business venture means a venture that more than 50% of the ownership is owned and controlled by ag producers. This ownership group is for those entities that have formed an organization with others to provide capital, other attributes to the venture, a processor, or things like that. And note that only 10% of the available funds will be awarded can be awarded in this category. The 4 applicant types must currently be producing and own more than 50% of the raw commodity that will be used for the value-added venture. They have to own the commodity through the raw commodity state through the production cycle of the value-added product. The applicant can propose to purchase a portion of the ag commodity as long as they're bringing at least 51% of the product to the table. All applicants must demonstrate an increase in customer base and that a greater portion of the revenue derived from the value-added product is being returned to the producer. Basically, we want to make sure we're looking that this is going to be something that the producer is going to be able to make more money than just selling their ag product to the market. Within the application, there needs to be documentation that shows an increase in the number of customers and a projected increase in the venture as a result of the grant. And if awarded, you need to track and report the same information throughout the value-added process, the grant. How do tribal applicants fit in? Tribal applicants must meet the definition of ag producer, and they must meet the requirements of one of the 4 applicant types. Please do note that independent producers or co-ops or majority-controlled business-based ventures that are Native Americans can apply as an individual and do not have to address the tribal entity criteria. The agency will determine the eligibility without regard to the day-to-day labor management and field operation and right to harvest. Please pay attention to Appendix A of our toolkit that will walk you through the information that needs to be provided to clarify how tribes can meet this definition. If you have questions about this whatsoever, please feel free to reach out to us and we can talk you through the process. Sorry about that. There are two types of value-add producer grant: a working capital and planning grant. Somehow I need to get back here. Sorry about this, people. Give me 1 second. So the two types are a planning grant. That's, as Chad was talking about from Red Cliff, where they were able to use the planning grant to put together a feasibility study to look at the possibility of putting together a fish processing plant on the reservation. The second type is a working capital, and that's what Forest County Potawatomi community put together in processing their bison and hogs and beef. The working capital can be used to pay projected expenses related to the processing or marketing of value-added product. The match and grant funds have to be both spent on eligible activities. A planning grant is, as we talked about, is to determine the feasibility of a production, look at the price point of the value-added product, and develop a marketing or business plan. This request of $50,000 or more for emerging markets. An applicant type has to be eligible, but required for co-ops, ag producers, and majority controlled. So if you're one of those three types, you have to apply under the emerging market. An emerging market is an applicant cannot have supplied this product in a geographic or demographic market for more than 2 years at time of the application submission. The second type variation is market expansion for those of 50,000 or more. You also have to be, it has to be an independent producer, and that you have to have successfully marketed the product for the last 2 years. And in lieu of a business independent feasibility study, you must submit a business or marketing plan. Market expansion includes expanding the market for existing value-added product produced and marketed by applicant for the last 2 years at the time of application submission, through sales to demonstrably new markets or new customers in new markets. The third type is for those applications that are seeking less than $50,000 for working capital. All types are eligible for this. While a formal business plan or feasibility plan are not required, the applicant needs to demonstrate in the application that the proposed venture is viable. Examples of use of the working capital: you can use it to pay the cost of processing the raw commodity into value-added product, product packaging and labeling, ingredients, promotional marketing, materials, and advertisement. The processing of the value-added product activities after the harvest and delivery of the ag product to the processing facility. Some examples of ineligible use of funds for working capital are expenses related to the ag production, again, after the harvest, planning or building or repairing facilities, use of grant funds to pay yourself or associated parties for subject raw commodity, and ineligible equipment expenses. So you can purchase equipment up to $5,000 that are depreciated over a 1 year period. Excuse me. I can't get to the next slide. There we go. Sorry about the technical difficulties here. One of the new things in this year's notice is hemp. In order for us to allow hemp to be an ag product, it has to be grown in accordance with the 2018 Farm Bill. You have to be licensed through the 2018 Farm Bill. It cannot be grown in accordance with the 2014 Farm Bill or any other state-issued license. There are several states and a couple tribes across the country that have approved 2018 licenses within the 2018 Farm Bill. But please do note that while you may be licensed to grow hemp with the 2018 Farm Bill, you also have to make sure that the processing facility is also licensed under the same farm bill. So this year it's going to be fairly difficult to see many projects growing using hemp as the ag product, but there's going to be lots of opportunities in the future for this ag commodity. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have questions, please continue to use the chat box. Now I'd like to turn the presentation over to my counterpart in California. Greg York, are you on?
I am, yes. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Greg York. I'm one of the management and program analysts with USDA Rural Development. I work out of the national office primarily on the value-added producer grant program. And the slides just advanced there for some reason. My apologies, 1 second, please. Okay, so I'm going to start off by talking to you a little bit about matching funds and what basically that entails. This is a one-to-one grant versus match. So for every dollar in value-added grant funds that you receive, you have to match it with $1 of your own funds. This can scare a lot of folks off, but there's quite a few ways to come up with your match, and it doesn't always have to be cash. So one of the big ways to cover your match is by contributing your in-kind raw commodity to the project. So the value of your raw commodity in its harvested state is valued at something. So whatever you could get for that raw commodity in its harvested raw state, that value can be used and applied towards your match. One of the first and best ways to take a look at your match when you're putting together your budget, because you are going to have to contribute some sort of raw commodity to the project, and you should get credit for that when you're looking at your match. The second option is through in-kind family labor, and that would be the farmer or any immediate family member of the farmer. That labor, that time that the farmer is going to be putting in or their family member is going to be putting in towards the project can also go to offset match. But keep in mind, this and only this item has a limit to it, and it's 25% of the total project cost. So someone coming in for a $50,000 grant, you'd really be looking at a $100,000 project. So it'd be $50,000 grant, $50,000 match, $100,000 project. You'd be capped out at $25,000 in in-kind family labor, either the farmer or the family member. This is not applicable to the in-kind raw commodity. There is no limit to in-kind raw commodity match. And then the third option we'd like to talk about is cash, loan, line of credit, basically cash match to the project. Now, when you're taking a look at your budget and you're putting everything together, I want you to kind of keep in mind one thing, though, that all these grants are scored, and they're scored on a competitive nature, and you're awarded based off best score, and then they go down the line from there. So when it comes to scoring, you want to make sure you're getting the best possible score you can. And one of the scoring criterion, this scoring criterion number 3, changed over the last couple of years. And basically, projects that contribute 100% cash receive the most points. Projects that contribute partial cash and partial in-kind, whether it's raw commodity, family labor, what have you, scores second best. And then those that contribute just in-kind as match score third best. So there is a sliding scale to it. So the more cash you're contributing, the better chances you have to get awarded. Now, there is the option for third-party cash, third-party in-kind contributions, which we do see from time to time. But I really think probably what you're looking at here is those projects that, you know, are planning grants, and maybe you have a third-party consultant that's going to be working on the project, and they're donating part of their wages or their fee, I guess you'd say, towards the project. So let's say a consultant typically, or a consulting firm typically charges $150 for feasibility study work, and they're discounting it to $100. That $50 times the hours they're contributing can go to count towards your match as well. So we're going to get into the 5 methodologies, basically the 5 options you have for doing something with your raw commodity that would be considered a value-added project. And the first and foremost, and this is probably the one that people think about the most when they look at a value-added producer grant project, is a change in physical state. So let's say, hypothetically, we're growing tomatoes, and we're going to take those tomatoes, we're going to convert them into, or process them into salsa, some sort of tomato sauce. jams, whatever it may be. You're doing something with the raw commodity that's going to alter its physical state that's irreversible. You're taking milk and making cheese, wheat into flour. These are all change in physical state eligible projects, but keep in mind that it has to be something other than a post-harvest process that primarily acts to preserve the commodity for later sale. So you have to actually be processing it into something in order to qualify as a change in physical state. The next option that you'll have to choose from is produced in a manner that enhances the value of the agricultural commodity. And I think probably what most people think about most when they look at this option is growing organically, maybe free-range chickens or grass-fed beef might be another option. And these would all qualify as enhancing the value of the agricultural commodity and therefore qualifying under this methodology. But I want you to keep in mind, we're on the second methodology right now. You only have to actually select one of them. So if you had the change in physical state covered on the previous slide, you can check that box. You put your explanation for what you're doing with the project and why it qualifies for a change in physical state, and you'd be done. If you so choose, you could actually check more than one box, and you could do the produce in a manner that enhances the value as well, if you also qualify for this. If you check more than one box, though, you want to make sure you define and explain each one equally as well. You're only required to define one methodology in order to qualify for the value-added producer grant, but you can choose more. So the third option is physical segregation. And to be truthful, we don't really receive any applications for this one. And I think the reason why is because if you're doing the physical segregation application methodology, you really qualify for the produce in a manner that enhances the value option also. So because of that, it's kind of repetitive to that other option. But a great example of the physical segregation would be GMO corn versus non-GMO corn. But again, non-GMO corn would be a method of producing your product that enhances its value, so you would qualify for the other one as well. The fourth option, we don't see a whole lot of these either, but we do have an option for farm or ranch-based renewable energy. And really what I think about with these is, you know, if you're planning on putting a digester in, maybe you need to do a planning grant for that digester, or some of the development work to get paperwork, that type of stuff, to get that digester in place. You could apply for a value-added grant to cover a renewable energy project. But I would probably encourage you, if you're taking a look at a farm or ranch-based renewable energy project, to talk with your local state specialist with rural development. We do have a program which is known as Rural Energy for America. And it probably, and the reason why we don't get a lot of applications for value added under this renewable energy category is probably because that program is a better fit most times than this one. So I'd encourage you to speak with a specialist in your state to see which program would be a best fit for you if you're looking to do some sort of renewable energy project. And then the final option you'll have to choose from out of the 5 is locally grown and produced agricultural food product. And I apologize here, the slide's not advancing, so let's give it just a second. There it goes. Locally produced agricultural food products. So this option is actually picking up a lot of steam over the last few years. And the reason why is because if you're producing some sort of raw commodity and you're going to sell it within the state or within 400 miles of where you're producing that commodity and you're marketing it as a locally produced agricultural food product, you don't really need to do anything else with the product in order to qualify as value added. So if you're growing vegetables as an example and you're taking them to a local farmer's market, and you're selling them and marketing them as a locally grown and produced agricultural food product. And by doing so, you're getting a little bit more revenue from those commodities than you would by just selling them wholesale. Then that could qualify as a locally produced agricultural food product, and therefore you could check that box. This is a good option for those, especially those looking to go to farmers markets, do some sort of farm stand sales, something like that. Because like I said, you don't have to actually process the raw commodity into anything outside of branding and selling it as a locally grown and produced food product. And from what I've been hearing through the industry, locally grown and produced food products are trending higher these days than a lot of your other options like organic, grass-fed, that type of thing. Because people want to know where their food's coming from. They want it to come from a local source, and they want to know that it's got, you know, the minimal amount of processing done to it, or preservatives added to it. So locally grown and produced is picking up a lot of steam with us. Now I'm going to get into some of the statistics from the 2018 Value Added Producer Grant Cycle. This seems to be what everyone wants to know. What's my chances for getting this grant? Well, in 2018, we received 556 grants. Out of those 556 grants, we deemed 378 of those eligible. I don't want you to get discouraged by this number because it's a little deceiving. And what I mean by that is every year, or every cycle, I should say, when the applications are due and the deadline's approaching, we receive applications. And ultimately, every cycle we receive applications from farmers that we never spoke with. We don't really know them very well. We might not know them at all. They saw the announcement, they decided to apply for the grant. And unfortunately, they might have had a great project idea, but they misunderstood what the grant's for, what we can pay for, what we can't. Or maybe they missed some of the documentation that's required in applying and they were deemed ineligible. Because of this, I'd like to encourage everyone, if you're thinking about applying for this grant, I'd like you to start speaking with your state rural development specialist as soon as possible. They'll help you make sure that you make it through this first phase of eligibility review so that you get past that 556 and right into that 378 of the applications that were eligible. And then once you receive, once you get past that eligibility phase and you're one of those 378, last cycle we funded 249 of those because we had 36 million I think it's 36.3 million available in funding. Now the way that works is that 378 to 249 is a nationally competitive grant. These grants are scored. They're scored by multiple individuals, some that work for our rural development, and then also outside scores, our independent reviewers. And the way it works is the top scorer gets funded first, next score down the line, and they go down until we run out of funds. Last time we had 36 million available to dish out. This cycle, we actually have up to 60 million to give out. So if you look at the numbers there, I think that should be a good indication to you that this is going to be a great year to apply for the grant if you have a project queued up and ready to go. Last cycle, we had 88% of the projects go out as working capital grants, 12% were planning grants. I know it looks like we don't do a whole lot of the planning grants, and that's true. It was only 12% this last cycle, but if you have a project and it's an idea at this stage, and maybe it's not completely on paper, written down, completely thought out. It's it's pretty well organized, but it's just not quite defined just yet. Planning grant can be a great option because it can allow you to go out and get that independent consultant to do a feasibility study for you, business plan, marketing plan, what have you, and really kind of put your idea to paper. But if you have a thorough plan in place, you've got everything thought out, you've got all your T's crossed, your I's dotted, all that type of stuff, and you basically have everything ready to go. And using construction terms, you have a shovel-ready project, then you can jump right into working capital, and a lot of people do that. You can see there 88% did, and by all means, you can jump right into a working capital grant and apply. Last cycle, we had an average grant size of 145,000, working capital that was almost 160,000, and planning grants were about 37,000. Keep in mind these numbers, the 145,000 average grant, that's really, what is that, a $291,000 average project, because it's $145,000 in grant, but that means $145,000 in match. I apologize, the slides are holding up here just a little bit. As far as applicant types go, by far, most of the applicants that come in are independent producers, but we do get our fair amount of cooperatives that apply, as well as majority controlled producer-based business ventures, and then agricultural producer groups. And then there is the option to receive priority points depending on the categories to the right that you're seeing there. And you can kind of see based off the applications we received in 2018 where the priority points went. And I would also mention that whenever you're filling out the priority point section, you may qualify for more than one of the options. You only need to check one of them because it's a max of 5 points, and you'll get your 5 points for the option you choose. So if it's socially disadvantaged, check that one if you're a beginning farmer or rancher. So you've been producing the product for less than 10 years, or been farming for less than 10 years, I should say. then you can check that one. You don't need to go any further than that. Fill out the appropriate appendice, and then you'll be good to go, and you'll get your priority points. And then here's just a little graph that kind of illustrates how many projects were funded that had priority points given to them, and how many per cycle weren't given any priority points. And you can see that most of the applications we fund do receive some sort of priority points. Now, we talked about the 5 different methodologies earlier, and I mentioned that 2 of them weren't really used too heavily, and you can see in 2018 they weren't used at all. So only 3 of them actually were used, which are the change in physical state, produced in a manner that enhances the value in the locally grown and produced agricultural food product. So keep in mind, though, with these that, change in physical state, somebody might have checked that one, but they also might have checked produced in a manner and checked both boxes. We're only counting them once on this particular statistics slide, but somebody could have checked more than one whenever they were applying. And here's some information about what kind of products we've been funding over the last cycle. You can see that there's a lot of animal products, alcohol and beverage products. We definitely do those as well. Keep in mind that if you're doing something along that line, you do have to have an active TTB license or permit. A lot of fresh foods, processed foods, seafood, grains, oilseeds, that type of thing. So one of the things I wanted to include for you today was some statistics on actual tribal applications that came in, and we'd like to see this increase. You can see since 2012, and that's what I had the data going back to, we've received quite a few tribal applications, but not as many as I'd like to see. This last cycle, 2018, we had 5 applications and funded 4 of them. So we definitely funded the highest percentage of applications in 2018, but it wasn't quite that many. I would definitely like to see more. So if you're looking to apply this cycle, please, by all means, start reaching out to your state staff as soon as possible, and they will help you put your applications together. The deadline for paper applications is March 10th, so you have just a little bit over a month. And if you choose the electronic option, you have until March 5th. So that's just a little less than a month for the electronic application. And then here's just a little stat on how much money went out on an annual, or not an annual basis, but I should say by a cycle basis for the value-added grant to tribal entities. So last cycle was $311,000 that went out. Now there's several tools out there and available to you whenever you're looking to apply. One of the things I would encourage you to do first and foremost is take a look at the website that's linked right there on this PowerPoint page. On that website, you're going to find a lot of useful information about the grant. You'll find links to the notice for funds. You'll find the regulations link, and then you'll find a lot of useful forms as well that'll help you fill out your grant application. One of the things that you'll find on there are some fact sheets that'll talk about locally produced foods, mid-tier value chains, and what have you. Those are great little read-throughs because they'll really lay out what we're looking for when you're looking at those types of things. In addition to that, you're going to find the value-added producer grant toolkits. Now, these are optional toolkits, but I would encourage everyone to take a look closely at those because I think you'll find that they make applying for the grant much simpler. These toolkits are basically put together. They provide you links to everything as well as a template for applying. The toolkit itself in there, the template's going to look something like this. It's going to be several pages long, but you're going to have spaces where you fill in blanks, others where you check boxes, and then there's going to be sections where you fill in narratives, some long, some short narrative sections. But this toolkit and the templates that's embedded within the toolkit will really provide you with a solid tool for applying for the grant to make sure that you don't miss anything and become one of those that drops out because of ineligibility issues. Also within that toolkit, you're going to find links to all the forms that you're going to need in order to apply, as well as some of the links to websites for DUNS number or SAMs as example, where you're going to need to go and register so that you can receive a federal grant. And then finally, in the back of the toolkit, you're going to find some appendices. And these are really helpful because there's going to be ones in there for matching funds where you fill out where your matching funds are coming from. If you're applying for a reserve fund category like socially disadvantaged, and you can fill out that appendice. And apply for that, and some of the other priority points and that type of thing. And then finally, we've got the DUNS and SAM registration websites. Those links, like I mentioned, are embedded within the toolkit, so you can just click on those. Both of these services I want to mention are free. There's several, if you were to Google SAM's registration as an example, there's several companies out there that try to charge you for this service. All you need to do is go to the sam.gov website, register your farm, your business, what have you, and it's free. There's no charge for it. So please avoid any of those services that try to charge you for either a SAM's or a DUNS number. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. While I open it up for questions, I'm just going to leave this slide up, this following slide, which is contact information for the national office. Obviously, Amy Cavanaugh is our program director, but then you have myself and then Mike Daniels, who are management and program analysts, as well as Melinda Martin, that are available to help. But like I mentioned earlier, I would definitely encourage you to go to the Value Added Producer Grant website. You'll find that if you use the drop down to the state where your farm is located, you can actually look up the contact information for the specialist within the state by doing that drop down option, and then work with somebody right there in your state on your project. So we'll open it up for questions, see if anything comes in.
Thank you, Greg. I know we've got one question that came in that hasn't been answered so far. A participant asked, can you give some examples of animal projects that were funded in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about one when we went past that slide, and a tribal one, actually. When I was working, and I should mention that I worked on this program in Washington State for a while, and then I transferred down to California, and I worked on it for California for the last few years before transferring over to the national office. And while in Washington, there's one tribal project that I saw, which kind of fits a couple categories that you don't always see. So it was a harvester application that came in. So they applied as an independent producer and then checked the harvester box. And the reason why they checked the harvester box is because they were harvesting salmon from the Puget Sound. And then they were packaging that salmon in vacuum sealed packaging, individual fillets, branding it and marketing it for sale in local Washington markets. And that was a great one because that was a fish product that was being processed right there locally and then also being sold locally. We've also done several meat projects. One that I'm thinking of here locally was River Dog Farms. They were taking their, and they were actually a pig project, and they were taking and processing their pigs, packaging them for individual sales, and then they were going to farmers markets and selling their selling their product. We've also done the same thing for cattle. One that I'm thinking of with the cattle is we actually had an entity that applied last cycle that received a grant in California. They were taking and processing their cattle, and then they actually sold their products through web-based services, and were actually pretty successful with it. So they weren't really looking for a brick and mortar retail location. They were selling through a website and customer base, returning customer base through the website.
Thank you, Dan. Did you want to add it? Oh, go ahead, Greg. We've got another question, but I was going to ask Dan if he had any sort of animal projects that he's come across in his work at IAC.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chad, I think that the really big one is, Chad had already talked about Red Cliff, but we've been talking with some other folks of who are doing livestock of cattle and buffalo. I've been working on some applications. Yeah, I'll say just from my perspective, one of the best things about this grant is the application itself. If you have an idea, you really need to get the basics of your business plan as part of the application. So I feel that that just even the activity, the process of developing the application can help to to really further articulate your vision of what you're doing if you're starting to just think about how to be adding value. So in addition to the potential for getting additional funding, it's a good exercise to do the application itself.
And Mike, I saw you answered the question online, but maybe you or Greg can give a little context. The question was, could you please reiterate if a feasibility study is required before one can apply for working capital?
Certainly. So if you're looking at an emerging market and you would have to have an independent feasibility study, a business plan. If you're market expansion and independent producer, you do not need to have the independent feasibility study, or if you're looking at a project that's under $50,000 and applying under simplified, you do not need to have the independent feasibility study, but you do need to be able to still show that it's a viable venture through, looking at your cash flows, your cash flow projections. What, where are you marketing? What is this a viable venture? You still have to be able to show that it's a viable venture.
Thank you, Mike.
I wanted to add one other note. I posted the link to IAC's website in the chat box, indianag.org, and in addition to working with your local rural development offices, your state offices, IAC we do provide additional assistance, especially looking at how do you come up with the matching funds. We did start a CDFI, a community development financial institution, Akiptan, that has has potential funding. So don't hesitate if you do have questions to get in contact with us as well.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any other questions? If you do have a question, you can post them in the chat box. You could also try to unmute yourself by hitting #6 and asking a question live if you would prefer that. I think we can take questions that way. We'll give folks a couple more minutes. Greg or Mike, while we're waiting to see if anything else comes up, do you have anything in closing you'd like to say?
Just like to thank Dan and for inviting us and setting this up. As Greg had said, I think this is a untapped potential for the tribes and the tribal members to really look at a program that has some great upside. And some of the tribes like Red Cliff and Forest County here in Wisconsin have taken advantage, and I think it's going to be a real boon to those tribes. So take a look at it, and if it's not this year, if it doesn't work out this year, start looking at it and asking those questions and vetting your project out and looking at it for something that might be available for the next open cycle.
Did get two more questions. I'll deal with the second first. So this might be best answered by Dan. The question was, what's the best way to differentiate your application from others? I have an initial thought, but I'll let Dan go first and add if I need to. But Dan?
That's a great question. I think not just for this application, but for any grant that you're writing of, how do you distinguish it? And I think it comes right back to your marketing for your overall product of what's the story? How is your story unique, compared to other growers, harvesters, producers? And really, I think telling that story, but then as Mike was talking about how are you going to be a viable business? And maybe for the planning, part of for planning for a feasibility study is determining whether it's feasible or not. But as much background and information and detail as you can provide, I think the better. And being very clear for certain questions like how many jobs is it going to be creating within your application, really emphasize some of those key points that the application, that the request for application is asking for. Being clear is important.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I would sort of double down on just following the scoring criteria and building your application, but I was going to take a step back even before that. Just be true to yourself and your tribe, and if you're an individual ag producer, your own production values. I always advise folks never chase a grant and try to fit your project or your strategies into our programs. The opposite really works much better. Stay true to yourself. see if our programs can fit into either the tribe strategy or a tribal ag production or an individual Native American producer's plan, and then really just articulate what you're trying to do, and stay true to your values and what your tribe or community or an individual ag producer is trying to do. Mike or Dan, anything else on that particular point?
No, I think you guys hit it right on the head there.
I'd
You
agree.
know, it really is about how well you lay out your project and your plan. And it really gets conveyed really well when we're reading through these. If someone, you know, kind of has a loosely thought out idea, or if they have a well-detailed idea or plan, I should say, and they really just need some cash, some implementation funds to get this project going. You know, the better you lay out your plan in your application, the more likely you are to get funded. And if you don't have a, you know, a super well thought out plan just yet, and, you know, at this point, it's just an idea, I really encourage you to take a look at that planning grant option, because that can be a great tool. You know, you can get a feasibility study done, you can get a business plan done, a marketing plan, you can have a third party independent person outside of the farm take a look at your idea and say, look, this makes sense, there's market for your project or for your product, the price points that you could potentially get for your product, what it's going to cost you to produce it, what you're going to need to produce it. All those things can be looked at as part of a feasibility study and a business plan.
The other thing that I would add is, you know, as you said, Ted, you know, don't try chasing a grant. The producer has a lot tied into this grant. You know, Dave talked about the time put in, not only the time, but the money and the effort that's put into it to make this a viable business venture. You know, and that sometimes can be lost. You know, oh, I'm looking for a grant. This grant is a little bit different because you really are putting your own time and effort into this to make your business a success. You know, and that's something that you need to really keep in the back of your head, that what am I doing, and, you know, is this viable? And, you know, the government is the reason for the grant is to remove some of the risk, and that's what we're doing. You know, the government is coming in and helping out with 50% of the project, but the bottom line is you're putting 50% into that venture, and, you know, that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Thank you, Mike. So one question about when the slide deck will be available. Dan, I have a couple options. You'll see my information, Mike and Greg's are all on this slide. You can always just send us an email directly and we can send you back a PDF or a PowerPoint version of the slides. Dan has put his email address right there in the chat box. So, but Dan, will there be, I know we're recording it, but is there a place where we can access this after the fact if folks want to listen as well as see the slides?
Yes, I'm going to put the slide deck. Yeah, I'm going to put the slide deck on my regional website is IAC-GreatLakes.com. I'm also going to work with our main office team to for both the recording and the slide deck to at least have a link available at IndianAg.com. Feel free to email me. I can send a PDF or the PowerPoint here as well. Hoping to have the recording online by tomorrow. And that will be, we'll share it with our social media too.
Thank you. There was a couple questions we didn't get to. One was about some maybe examples. And the last question that was coming in, Sherry, I can't tell if you're asking other folks that might be participants if they're interested in talking about opportunities with salmon and seafood. So we're at the top of the hour, a minute past, so I don't want to keep folks on the line too much. Sherry, if you want to follow up with us directly to get your question answered, that would be best. I did want to thank all of you for participating today. I wanted to thank Mike and Greg and Dan for their presentations, as well as our colleagues from Red Cliff Band and Chippewa Indians. So with that, we'll leave you for today. If you need anything or follow-up, please don't hesitate to follow up with either the Intertribal Ag Council and their TA network or USDA Rural Development. So thanks so much, Dan, for getting this put together. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you guys as well.
Thanks, Dan.
Have a good day, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you.